Have you always wanted to listen to an artist or band but you didn't know where to start? Don't worry, I'm here to help. I've had a lot of positive feedback from my last video of starter packs, which gives you recommendations for 1 to 2 albums or projects to check out if you're brand new to a particular artist or group. This time around we're doing it a little different and we're covering a whole decade of an entire genre, 90s hip-hop. I've picked 10 albums to give you an intro course into this incredibly large, incredibly diverse era of music. And for all the experts and old heads watching, yes, I know I left out a ton of great stuff here, but this video is for the beginners, and it has the bare bones basics, the need to know albums and artists before you dive deep. Remember, these aren't all necessarily the best, but they are all essential. First up, we start with maybe the most well-known and influential album of West Coast rap, The Chronic by Dr. Dre. For those that don't know, Dre was part of NWA in the 80s. Once the group split up, he teamed up with the Notorious Suge Knight and signed to his record label Death Row. As a producer, this is where Dre perfected his trademark California G-Funk sound, which is the prevalent style on The Chronic. This is also where he introduced us to a guy named Snoop Dogg. Maybe you've heard of him? This is a landmark album for gangster rap and almost universally considered to be one of the best albums of any genre, so this one's an obvious must-hear. And while we're on the topic, let's stick to the West Side for now. Once The Chronic gave us an intro to the signature laid-back style of Snoop Dogg, his debut album Doggystyle proved he was more than a novelty. This one came out a few months after The Chronic in 1993, and yes, Dr. Dre produces this one as well. Not only do we get Snoop in the spotlight so he can show off his melodic flows and freestyling skills, Dre by this time perfected his G-Funk style to be more synth-heavy, catchier, and, well, funkier. The 1-2 punch of these two albums established the sound of a very popular facet of 90s hip-hop, so don't sleep on either one of them. Of course, the birthplace of hip-hop was the East Coast, and in the 90s, New York City rap was having a hell of a revival. So many great names came out of the boroughs during this time, and of course we're going to talk about some of them. First up, don't miss out on the debut album from hip-hop's finest collective of all time, the Wu-Tang Clan. Enter the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers is an intro to all the unique personalities and talents in this group, which consisted of 9 members at the time. Ask any Wu-Tang fan why they're the best group, and they'll tell you why. Just make sure you got a few hours, because these people know their stuff. There's a whole universe surrounding the Wu. But one thing any diehard fan will tell you, start with 36 Chambers. The album showcased the gritty production, martial arts fandom, and lyrical prowess of legends like Ghostface Killah, Method Man, Raekown, Old Dirty Bastard, the GZA, and the RZA, who also produced the album. 36 Chambers basically set the blueprint for the 90s version of hardcore hip-hop, with every member showing off their violent and sometimes very funny lyrics. If you want to dive further into the Wu-Tang universe, after this one, I've listed some essential solo albums from individual members. You can find those in the description below. Another East Coast crew you need to know about, A Tribe Called Quest. These guys were at the forefront of a new style of more intellectual, conscious, instrument-based hip-hop called alternative hip-hop. While most of the mainstream at this time was all about the funky production and gritty realism of gangster rap and hardcore rap, A Tribe Called Quest had more diverse production and were more jazz influenced in their sound and addressed social issues and philosophy in their lyrics. Now you could either go with Low End Theory or Midnight Marauders here for an intro. I just personally picked Midnight Marauders because it was my intro to the group, and I think with hits like Oh My God and Award Tour, it's a bit more accessible. But make sure regardless that you don't skip out on A Tribe Called Quest. And don't skip on Nas, specifically what's considered maybe the best rap album of the decade, and of any decade, Illmatic. It's not your average 90s hardcore hip-hop album. The debut from Nas has been called cinematic, the way it tells a unique, detailed narrative of life in Queensbridge. It's been hailed as a masterpiece from a production standpoint too, solidifying the sound of boom bap for New York rap, and incorporating soul jazz samples alongside Nas's very specific poetic references to a particular moment in time he wanted to capture on the album, going in depth on themes of violence, drugs, city life, gang rivalries, poverty, and even the artistic merits of rap, which was becoming more and more commercial during the 1990s. Forget learning about 90s hip-hop. If you're a music fan, you need to listen to Illmatic. full stop. Now we're going from Queensbridge to Bed-Stuy, representing Brooklyn like no other in the world of hip-hop. You know who it is. You know who we have to talk about. Biggie Smalls, Big Papa, the Notorious B.I.G. Even if you're only casually familiar with rap music, you still know about the intense East Coast, West Coast rivalry in the 90s and how it led to the murders of two of the genre's biggest talents, Biggie and Tupac. Both of these artists and their stories are essential. And for Biggie, start with Ready to Die, his debut album and the only one released during his lifetime. It's a perfect introduction to just what a talent this guy was. His ability to tell stories and change his voice and deliver huge hooks. He's easily one of my favorite rappers of all time, and it doesn't get any better, in my opinion, than this album. Of course, Biggie will forever be linked to Tupac Shakur, another West Coast rapper from the era you need to check out. Signed to death row along with Dre and Snoop, Tupac is probably more well known today for his outspoken activism and later on his thug life persona than for his actual music. But he still made a huge mark on West Coast rap. Most fans would tell you to start with All Eyes on Me, his most popular album, but it's 2 hours long. It's a double album, and there's a lot of filler there, to be honest. Instead, I'd start with the one before that one, Me Against the World. He wasn't yet signed to death row and hadn't really dove into the gangsta rap image he's most known for. It's not as guest heavy and not as bloated, and for many fans, it's considered to represent quote-unquote true Tupac. Another big name we gotta talk about is Jay-Z. Now, while I personally think if you want a proper intro to this rapper's catalog, you need to start with some albums he made in the 2000s, but he's still a big part of Brooklyn hip-hop in the 90s. And so for an intro and probably a great example of the genre in the decade's later years, when rap was getting incredibly popular and becoming the juggernaut genre it is today, I would go with Volume 2, Hard Knock Life. It's got some huge hits you'll be familiar with, and this was truly Jay hitting his stride after 2 solid albums before this one. Now, we can't talk about 90s hip-hop without talking about Lauryn Hill. Her album, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, is considered one of the best at all time. It won the Grammy for Album of the Year, the first hip-hop album ever to do so. And it's definitely a record you should listen to eventually. Instead, I would start with her album, The Score, that she did with 2 other important figures, Wyclef Jean and Pras. I'm talking about the trio known as the Fugees. When you listen, you'll immediately know Killing Me Softly, but this whole thing is a banger front to back and earns a place on this list for its intelligent lyrics, preference for live instrumentation, and the straight up timeless bars from 3 of rap's best rhymers. Now, we've talked a lot about the East Coast and West Coast, but there was one area that was coming up in the 90s that had a major impact on rap, the South. And maybe the most important artists from the South are Andre 3000 and Big Boi. The duo from Atlanta, better known as Outkast. You've probably heard most of their big hits, but even if they weren't superstars yet in the 90s, they were still turning heads in the rap world. And before the decade ended, they released one hell of an album you need to hear, Aquemeni. I mean, you should hear everything Outkast ever did, no matter what decade. Listen to their whole catalog. But I picked this one here because, well, it was released in the 90s, and this video is about 90s hip-hop, and also it showed the duo becoming a more lyrical, introspective, analytical, and creative front. Not just in their lyrics, but in their production experiments and sonic choices as well. Just as the boom bap and G-funk sounds were starting to grow stale, groups like Outkast and others from the South were injecting a healthy dose of fresh sounds into rap as the century was wrapping up. Sounds we eventually got to hear all over the radio and MTV. So there you have it, a 10-album starter pack to get you into 90s hip-hop. There was so much great stuff from great artists in the 90s rap scene. I didn't even talk about Pharcyde, Bone Thugs, Ghetto Boys, Beastie Boys, Pete Rock and CL Smooth, Ice-T, Mobb Deep, Gang Starr, Public Enemy, Ice Cube, Cypress Hill, UGK. I didn't even talk about UGK. So I might have to make a part 2 to this one, but in the meantime, enjoy your starter pack and dive deep into these albums to get you started. Please like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments if you like these starter pack videos, if they're helpful, and what you want to see next. Also, let me know what your thoughts are of this video and my choices. What albums did I miss? Which ones would you put in your starter pack for 90s hip hop? Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time.